Hi, second graders. It's Mrs. Jansen, and I hope you had fun doing your backyard drawings. We are going to be doing something completely different and very loose this time around for our art project, so I hope you're ready for that change. Today we are going to be learning just some basic strokes and the style of Sumi Japanese ink painting. And that is just a very different kind of painting than the type of drawing that we have just done. So the supplies that you are going to need are, you are going to need the two different sheets of white paper that I have sent home with you. You will need the container of the black paint and the pink paint that I sent home with you. You will need some paint brushes. I actually have a Japanese Sumi brush here. Obviously, I would assume you do not have this, but you can see that it is a round brush tip. That's what I want you to have. So I have just a regular round brush tip. I want you to have a brush that is slightly bigger like this. So this would be a small brush. This is not going to work because it just can't hold enough water. So you're going to want a larger round tip brush. The other kind of paintbrush that sometimes you see me use are these flat ones. And again, this won't work because it's not going to have the right kind of tip, so you're going to want a round one. You will also need a container of water and some sort of paper towel so that we can put our wet brush against and we can use to scoop up any kind of paint that we have. Before we get started with our practice painting and our final painting, we will look at the finished project that Mr. Warner has done in the past. And you can see this is a Sumi style painting of a plum branch. Now, when you look at this, I hope you can see there are only paint marks and brush marks. There are no pencil lines. This style of painting is done without any kind of preparatory work. You just work with what's usually ink, watered down ink. We'll be using watered down paint that we get really wet with our brush and we spread. Now this large brush does all of these kinds of lines. It makes thick lines and then these thinner lines and then these super skinny ones. And we also will be pressing down and putting on our solid blossoms as well. The Sumi style painting basically has four main strokes. So we're going to look at a couple of pictures of what these strokes look like in our book today. But then also I have included a link to some short videos of Japanese artists and other artists who are working in this Sumi style. So it's fun to see how they hold the brush. They frequently are going to be holding it vertically and they're going to be holding it loosely. And then when we're doing our samples, I'll kind of show you how to do that a little bit. We'll kind of play around and then we'll do our final painting as well. So the Sumi style drawing is a Japanese form of basically painting both images and doing calligraphy. Calligraphy is a particular way of, when you look at these photos, you can see they're kind of loose. The official Sumi style, they talk about Sumi as four strands that they call the four gentlemen. And these styles of lines that are painted are called bamboo, wild orchid, chrysanthemum, and plum branch. So when we look at these, we see our bamboo. And the bamboo lines, you can see not only make the trunk, but then also the bamboo leaves. You can use those strokes to make birds as well, like this one. So the first gentleman, it's the bamboo. The second one is the wild orchid, and these are very long and then they can get thick. And again, you're using that brush to go from thin to thick. The third one is the chrysanthemum. And you can see we have these thicker strokes that are put together to create a layered look. The chrysanthemum, like the other of the four gentlemen, you do these strokes and you can create different styles and different objects. And the last one is the plum branch. As you can see, we go from a really thick, kind of a gnarly branch to these thinner lines with the blossoms, which is what we saw in Mr. Warner's example painting. The four gentlemen represent all the forms and shapes in the universe. So these four different strokes was thought to, by the Chinese, to represent all the different kinds of shapes in the universe. Some also said that they were called the four gentlemen because only men of wealth had the leisure time to practice and enjoy calligraphy and painting. So the Japanese learned these four styles of brushstrokes and brought them back and created the word sumi, which means ink picture. So we're going to start off our sumi style painting with our brush. I'm going to initially start using the sumi brush, but I will also use this one that should be similar to what you have. So I want you to take your paper that's a little bit thinner and it's not as long, and you want to set that on your flat area to work. If your parents are concerned about this paint getting on the table, you can put a sheet of paper underneath. The key to this kind of painting is making certain that your brush is very wet. So I've been soaking it. I'll bring this water closer so you can see. I've been soaking it in the water, so it's really nice and drippy. I'm going to take that and I'm going to add that to my paint. Now I'd already scooped up some of my paint and I put it into this big well of my paint palette. You can just pour out a little bit of your black paint and add a decent amount of water to it on a paper plate. That's fine. Or the lid of, like a jar. So I'm going to get my brush already had a lot of water in it, and now I've mixed it in and it's got a lot of paint. And we're just going to practice some of our lines. So I'm holding the brush really loosely, and I'm holding it higher up on the paintbrush so it's going to be looser. If I hold it down really tight here, I'm not going to be able to make those brush strokes as loose as the style asks you to. And usually you want your brush to be kind of more vertical. So I'm just pulling across the paper the tip of the brush. And you can see how the tip, it all gets squished together. So I started with a fat line, and if I keep using it and I don't get any more ink, my next lines with the same brush get thinner. And I'm just putting them in a row. I can go back to where I had the most paint and I can pick some more up. I can kind of twist around my brush as well and make some different marks. And then, and again, I'm holding it really loosely, I've got my tiny little tip at the top, and I'm going to go ahead and I'm making some thinner lines like that. So let's get some more of our watered down paint, and let's try that again. This time I'm just setting the brush on its side and I am making marks. So the first one were very much the bamboo marks, and now I'm playing around with some of the chrysanthemum marks where we're letting the brush itself, all I am is putting it down and picking it up. And you will see that we have a dark area in almost all the spots of the painting that where you have some of the paint pools a little bit more. And again, I can try my thin lines, and I can use my tip. And as I hold it up more vertically, you can see how thin I can get those lines. So that's what it looks like when you're using the Sumi brush. I'm going to use the round brush. That should be very similar to what you have. And I'm going to try doing those same things. I'm going to get it really wet. I'm going to put it in the very watered down paint so I can do that same thing. And as I'm holding it up at the top and I'm doing it loosely, I'm going to get a little bit more paint. This brush doesn't hold as much water, so I press it down, and as I pull farther away, it's going from dark to light. Now, again, I've created a nice little tip on my brush, so I'm just going to hold that vertically and try making some thinner lines with it. So I'm back to these bamboo lines like this, which is a lot of fun. So I want you to go ahead and join me if you haven't already. Mix up your paint, water it down, and try making some different kinds of lines. Some that are thick and some that are thin. I'm going to do some that are kind of like that wild orchid. It goes thick to thin, and I kind of turn my brush to make those marks. And I'll pick up some more of the paint. And again, you can see if when I start from the center and I move out that it's darker in the center and it gets lighter. So I always just think it's so fun that with that same, what seems to be a really thick brush, that I can get these thinner and thinner lines. But notice wherever you start to then how you pull out, the thinnest part will be the end of your stroke. So my first one will have the most, and it usually gets thinner as we go. So let's try the chrysanthemum. So we've got the wild orchid and the bamboo. Let's try the chrysanthemum one, which is, again, kind of just letting our brush make its shape by itself. You can kind of see a little bit of the difference of the shape of my brush. I need to water down my paint. If you get a really dark spot like that one that I just got, you can just make sure you water it down. And it's okay on this practice sheet if you layer over. If you have already watched the other videos, you'll see that they often get the paper wet and then they let the ink spread from there. So they like to use wet on wet often. Okay, so our plum branch would be, we would press down a little bit more and make a thicker branch and pull one. And then again, I would pull some more from it that are thinner once I've changed the tip of my brush, because I was pressing it down, then it creates a nice little tip. And the plum one would have the smaller petals like that we would press. So I want you, second graders, to just have fun experimenting and playing with this one sheet of paper and put some more marks on as you go. I want you to just enjoy yourself and really kind of see what your brush will do. And I want you to do this until you feel pretty comfortable with playing with the brush lightly and holding it more on the top and putting those lines in really gently. I want you to feel free to go ahead and experiment. Finished with your brush strokes and the practice of them, we're going to set this aside and we're going to go ahead and get started on our big official Sumi painting. Just want to remind everyone what Mr. Wanners looks like. And so we are going to start off by doing one really thick branch to begin with. And as you can see, it's a single stroke and it moves all the way from one end to the edge of the paper. So that's what we're going to start with because that's our thickest one. Just like when we were practicing, we knew that as we had less paint and ink, we could do the thinner lines. So I've got my paper in front of me. And again, if you need to cover up, if at any point you need to cover up your tabletop, you can go ahead and do that. I'm going to get my brush really wet. This time I'm going to add a little bit more of my paint to that area that has a lot of water because we want to make sure that our brush strokes really show up. So we're going to do the black first. Most of the Sumi drawing was just done with black ink because I just really felt like they had so many complicated and beautiful lines they could make and marks with the brush that they didn't need to add the color. So I'm going to start here and I've plopped it and I'm holding my brush really loosely. Now my brush tip, Mr. Wanner might have had a bigger one. You can see his branch is really thick. So we might have to do a couple of ours together. So I'll do another one. It's going to go with this one. I can add a little bit more water so my paint continues to flow. I'm just holding it really loosely and I'm pulling it. The brush is just a little small. I'm just going over it more than once. I'm going to add a little bit of water and I'm going to pull from the paint that I have at the end. Your black paint should be a little bit nicer than the one I'm using, which has a lot of a green and a greenish tint, green blue. So I am moving my paintbrush all the way across and creating that branch. And what we're going to do now, if you look at Mr. Wanner's, is we're going to make a couple of medium branches that are going to come. So I added more paint. And you can see I went from thick to a thinner line. And add water to your paint if it needs to be thinned down. And I'm just using it really light. And I'm going to pull another one. We can see how I've got this nice little tip. So I'm going to use that to pull off some smaller, even smaller branches. We've got that. We'll try another one up here. And again, I'm holding my brush really lightly. And if you kind of pause in between some of those lines, that's fine. You can always get a little more water and add it to your paint. Loose and always just kind of working in one direction. I just keep going from the lines that I've put on. And you should be going from a little bit thicker, and then as you get to the end of that line, it gets a little thinner. So I'm doing this, and again, I can pull more paint from those little pockets or pools that formed of the paint. I'm going to work on this last little spot here. And again, holding my brush really lightly and pulling it with its little tip. So this is really kind of that bamboo line that we're talking about. and I can get a little more if I need. We're going to be adding our plum flowers. You can see we've got our really thick lines, and then we've done some of our smaller brush strokes as they go. And I would say that's about it. I think we want to let our paintings dry, let our lines be. You don't want to overwork them, just like we talked about, where we don't do any pre-drawing. And then on this branch, we will put our blooms in with our brush again. We'll put in our pretty blossoms, but we need to wait for this to dry. So I will see you as soon as your painting has dried. Welcome back, second graders. My branch painting is just about dry. You can see there are a couple of wet marks left. We need to finish by putting on our petals for our plum blossoms, and we are going to do that in kind of that chrysanthemum style, and with some of the short strokes of the plum blossom where we'll just be pressing with our brush. So we're going to do that, and we'll be putting our name on, and then we'll be finished with our Sumi drawings / paintings. Make sure that you have your pink all mixed and ready to go. I added white to the pink that I am using because my pink is just a little bit different than yours is. So just make sure it's nice and wet. We're going to go ahead and we're going to give 5 blossoms, or 5 petals, excuse me, to each of our flowers. And as you can see, I'm just pressing my brush down 5 times in a row near each other. I'm going to do that in a couple of spots. If it looks really light, you can go ahead and grab a little bit more paint. I'm thinking we're going to want at least 5 blossoms I'm going to have room for on my painting. I just like this really loose style of painting because there's something really relaxing about it, and also spontaneous, so you don't overthink it. So I hope you're having fun trying this out. I'm thinking this one is looking a little bit light, but we'll just let it dry. Mostly you just want to put your brush strokes in, and then you want to be done. You don't want to keep going over it. Not in the Sumi style. We just kind of let it be what it is. So I have 4 in so far. I'm going to add a little bit of my pink. Again, you can mix yours just on a paper plate. You can see how bright my pink is, which is why I added white to it, because it's a little over the top. Okay, so I'm going to do 5 flowers. I think I want to do one way over here. So we've got, you can kind of look at your painting as a whole and see, okay, is there any spot where I've got, the one thing I don't like is a bunch of, all of these are kind of lined up here, which I don't like. I like that this one's closer and this one's farther away. So I think I am going to put one more. I'll go in and put a little black line to it. I'll scoop up any last bit of my paint. So that makes me feel better, having that one there. I'm going to clean my brush. I'm going to pick up a little bit of that black. I need to because I added an extra blossom. So I am putting in a couple extra branches so that I can have my blossom look like it belongs on a branch. Once you have your flowers in, I want you to go ahead and just put in your name in the corner. And then we have our Sumi painting. I hope you had a lot of fun. If you have leftover paint, feel free to make a bunch of these. Experiment and play with your lines. I'd love to see both your finished piece and anything else that you paint. List it on Seesaw. Have a great week.